So excited now to move swiftly to how to transition to clean energy and voices from the next generation that are working actively in this space to get us there. I am so excited to have you all joining me on stage. Welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So let's go through who everyone is here. We have Isaias Hernandez, climate educator focusing on storytelling about environmental justice. He's well known in his field under the social moniker Queer Brown Vegan, and his independent media platform has a global audience of over 100,000 followers. And hopefully, yeah, that's pretty cool. In the world of social media, you are reaching the masses, so thank you for all the work that you're doing. Christy Drupman is otherwise known as Brown Girl Green, also with a massive social media platform. She's a speaker, consultant, media producer, and environmental educator. She's the co-founder of the Green Jobs Board, which is a climate tech startup bridging the equity and inclusion gap within the green economy by bringing more diverse talent into the environmental field. So really giving opportunities to the next generation to get involved in the green economy. Awesome, Christy. Thank you for being here. And Dinara Ermakova, I got that. I've even been to Kazakhstan. I have no excuses. I've been to your hometown of Astana. You're a nuclear advocate, you're a public speaker, and you're an expert in nuclear technology and policy. You're originally from Astana, Kazakhstan. You earned your doctorate in nuclear engineering from UC Berkeley, and you're currently working in strategy, communication, and outreach to advance nuclear as an avenue to solving climate disruption and providing just access to abundant clean energy. And as somebody who strongly advocates for needing the clean energy transition, needing to have these technologies to support it, I'm really happy to have you here on this stage to speak with us as well. So, let's get started. I'm going to start with you, Dinara. What does the just energy transition really mean?
I think the more important part we forget is that transition happened in the Western world, where we already have all the resources. We have money, finances, right? We have talent. But when we talk about the developing world, it's not a transition, it is a development from scratch. Some people don't have access to water, electricity, medical support, and there is no bridge, because when we try to pitch transition, it's just we forget about the countries which have no access to all the resources we have here. And just transition, it means we don't leave those countries behind, we don't leave communities behind. We try to work together and provide solutions that work for those communities, rather than provide some solutions without consulting with them and feeling good about this.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Yes. Don't all countries deserve access to, don't they deserve rich energy lives? That's the question I'd like to put out there for those of you tuning in, those of you here in person, and to the panelists, of course. Your thoughts on this question, Christy?
I would just say that, like, when it comes to thinking about a just transition, it's making sure that people aren't left behind. If we're going to be able to move towards, a just and inclusive energy transition, that means making sure that there's good paying jobs, there's opportunities that makes it easy for people who are in these, historic extractive industries to transition easily to a new industry, whether that be through skills training, workforce development, being able to provide resources and access to their community. There needs to be co-benefits. It can't just be this euphoria of okay, this is the agenda of the clean energy transition, and we don't really care about you all because you're uneducated or you are a part of that part of the problem. It needs to be that they're a part of the solution, and they need to feel like they're a part of the solution. So how can we communicate that and make sure that there's actual infrastructure, opportunities for unionizing, things like that, that actually allows those folks to feel supported in that transition is really important.
I love that. And to never lose hope too, right? To be able to, we just heard from Marcin Mitchell from WWF, how important it is to preserve that hope so that people are excited, the next generation's excited about ushering in this clean energy transition. Otherwise, are we gonna get them to really do the work that's gonna be required, right? What do you think about all of this? What does a just clean energy transition mean for you?
Yeah, back a few months ago, I attended the Clean Energy Freedom Forum, where I got to meet Secretary Jennifer Granholm and Ukrainian Prime Energy Minister. And I think one of the things that I realized is that Ukraine is dependent on nuclear energy, And I think the importance of that Clean Energy Forum was to kind of address the fact that achieving energy equity or energy justice is going to be coming from these corporations that have historically also polluted the planet. And I think on that end, there's a lot of solutions that are being presented as alternatives to our energy systems. But I think a clean energy future to me also looks into advocating anti-terrorism, since our energy grids are at risk for being attacked. They're constantly being threatened and dismantled in different areas. And so I think on my end, it's going back to the fact that Black and Indigenous POC communities are usually the ones that are working in these fossil fuel sectors. They are employed by these industries. So how do we get them to understand that the importance to transition out from these extractive systems is also educating them, which is why it's so important for us to recognize that there are these different solutions like solar and wind that are being out there and they're being scaled, but also to ensure that there is safety in the workplace, that there is diversity, that there is equity, that there is inclusion, that there is anti-racism being talked about in this just transition.
I love that. Exactly right. And then when we see leaders like Jennifer Granholm really championing for various technologies and trying to overcome those barriers that are resulting in these technologies not reaching it to commercial viability, I wonder what your thoughts on that are, Dinar. What are some of the challenges that policymakers are facing to get, let's say, nuclear to commercial viability? What are the challenges you're seeing working in this space to actually see some of these things make it to market?
That's a good question, because it involves a lot of financing questions, like how do we finance projects that are very far in the future, let's say 10 years when we will commercialize some of the advanced reactors, and then how do we source the funding to build those, because some of the sources of funding only care about short-term solutions, like how do we bring something into market and get the revenue fast as possible. But another hurdle is about the policy and regulations. How do we really bring some technologies as complex and at the same time so advanced to the market, having so many regulatory hardships to just bring this technology to test them? And having the technology for 70 years working fine, that already proves that technology is there. We have every knowledge, we have expertise, but by not building the technology, we are losing expertise and talent. People just fly to France and work there because they have the whole fleet of nuclear, and then we lose in this kind of game because we are losing talent, and it takes time to build the task force from scratch when you don't have enough people studying nuclear, for example, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering. There are many fields that are seeing shortage of people specialized in certain skills. And those are topics that are making it harder to bring these technologies on market, and also the public support. We need more people that could openly say, hey, we don't know enough about nuclear. Can you talk more about that, rather than saying, hey, nuclear is dangerous or bad, because that's not true. And we try to provide as much information with our partners and other communicators about nuclear energy, about the benefits in agriculture and medical support and other fields. In space exploration, there are so many opportunities that we can benefit from one technology, and how much it can benefit the other countries that don't yet have access to these technologies. So those are the hardships,
challenges that we need to overcome.
Yes.
Thank you for articulating that so clearly. You know, it's International Women's Month. Maybe we can get a little round of applause for half of the world's population, and where we're hoping to take women in the future, and one being the pursuit of science, technology, engineering. I'm always thinking environmental, but environmental engineering, and math, right? STEM fields. So in exactly what you described, bringing in the next generation of the workforce that cares about pursuing these technologies and these advancements, but making sure we bring women along as well. Still, the number of women that are in this field it's abysmally small. So also keeping that in mind is, how do we really create a diverse workforce in the future for some of these really exciting technologies? So how can we get the activist community more involved? And some of the segments of the activist communities, especially the younger generations, are pretty against nuclear, to be totally frank. So from your vantage point, and I know you think nuclear needs to be part of the solution, how do you think we can activate the various demographics, some of these different groups to support what we see as going to be necessary to transition to clean energy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think on my end, to be quite frank, is that even my friends that are nuclear advocates, is that I still don't support it just because I tell them I see the plans, I see the strategies, I see the development that's happening. What I do not trust is the government, not because of a conspiracy theory, but because time after time, if you look at history, how much they have failed their people and they serve the interests of corporations, that itself is what I'm so skeptical about. I said, my friend was telling me about, for example, Diablo Canyon that's happening here in one of the states, and they're trying to save it. And a lot of those are women that are working there. They're labor union orgs, and they're also trying to purchase some of the land to go back to indigenous sovereignty and indigenous communities. That itself, I see those strong cases for nuclear, right, to continue existing, because if that were to shut down, more natural gas and fossil fuel industries would open up. And so I think it's it's also nuanced, but also I try to understand the narratives of indigenous communities that have the legacy of nuclear colonialism that still themselves do not have reparations today. And I think on my end, it's a two-sided battle where it's like I see the science, I see the methodologies, I see these really creative implementations, but I think I still have this skepticism that U.S. governments are able to actually implement those policies and ensure those safety regulations at a higher extent. Not to say that they're not doing it, I'm just saying those extra precautional steps that could be taken, I don't know if they're ready to do that.
That's fair. I mean, that's an absolutely fair point to make, is if we're going to bring technologies and some of these moonshot technologies in the pipeline, right, we're going to need policymakers to be responsible and to make sure that the publics that they're attempting to provide energy to are protected. I mean, does energy matter if the actual communities are still suffering? So that's a completely fair point. It's taken. Point well taken. So that goes back again to the last panel with Marcin Mitchell, who said, and Jad Daly, who said, vote, vote, vote. The next generation needs to care, needs to be involved, and needs to ensure that those who represent us are supporting our best interest in terms of technology, in terms of protecting communities with those new technologies as well. So point well taken. Christy, you work with your Green Jobs platform, and do you think that this will also help, picking up on what Dinara was saying in terms of that this being a big challenge, not having the trained, educated workforce for future technologies? Do you think that your platform and other efforts similar to yours will be able to provide the next generation with the right skills to support this clean energy transition?
Yeah, I mean, that's like one of the biggest goals of the Green Jobs Board moving forward with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. The goal of that is to create, large swaths of, economic development and job development. And a big part of that is to build this clean energy transition, right? But again, there's so much supply of these jobs, but not enough people who they can fill those jobs in because of, the need for, upskilling, workforce development, all these things. So there needs to be pathways, there needs to be curriculum, and that's a big thing that we want to build at Green Jobs Board, is being able to make that really easy for people, whether or not you have a college degree, that you are a part of the solution, and that they're, again, good paying jobs, that you would have unionized benefits, and again, you wouldn't be put in a position where maybe you have to work 10 to 20, 30 hours a day or whatever, a ton of hours in the day, breaking your back, sweating, putting together a solar array. That is not what I view as a just transition. What I view is that you would be able to get an education and have a long-term career pathway even after you were an installer or working on, wind turbines or working on the research for those technologies, whatever. There'd be a long-term career trajectory for you, and you'd have benefits, so that way you could also pass that on to another generation. Those are the ways we need to start thinking about these industries, is not, again, this short-term thinking of, okay, we're going to build these things, and then it's just going to be extracted again, and we're going to throw it away. Again, back to your previous question, I think with the clean energy transition, there needs to be talking about a circular economy. And I think with building a circular economy, there needs to be circularity within building a proper workforce. And in order to embed circularity into a growing workforce, you have to think about every step of the way on how we're going to skill up, train up, and think about the next generation on where they're going to end up 5 to 10 to 20, 30 years from now. And I think those of us at Green Jobs Board, we're at the very beginning of that journey of building that infrastructure, but I'm really excited to see what we're going to be able to do with that.
I love that. I love that. And this requires telling a story. So let me come back to you, Isaias. How is it that you are using your platforms and using your platform and Christy's platform to share everything that we're talking about here, some of the challenges, some of the solutions, what's needed, getting people excited? How is storytelling really critical to this process, to ultimately the transition to clean energy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the humanization component, because I think one of the biggest things I really like to teach my community is climate terminology. I think words are both powerful and dangerous tools at the same time, depending on who uses it. And, you know, my community, I talked about this terminology called petromasculinity that was coined by Carrie Daggett. And it looked into how fossil fuels, America's fossil fuel addiction has created a new type of masculinity that centers around this idea of American sovereignty. And what she argues specifically is saying that the death of the fossil fuel industry cannot happen when we have existing technologies that are emerging and still relying on the same systems. And I think in terms of that storytelling piece, it's not to say that, you know, she's right? Other people will disagree, some people will agree. But I think that the point of talking about these terminologies is that it gets people to kind of think about toxic masculinity, patriarchy, environmentalism, and energy. And when I talked about it, it was funny because, you know, a lot of conservatives were like harassing me and like sending me like messages. But on the other hand,
to the club.
yeah, on the other hand, I got this really interesting conversation of like people saying, you know, I work at the energy sector, and the amount of sexism and misogyny that I've been facing and the reliance of this type of toxic culture that's in America itself does really illustrate the term. And, you know, I give accreditation to this professor again to talk about it, because I think storytelling itself can draw conversations, but it can also bring out different opposing views. And the idea in my work isn't to say the solution, it's to say this is a classroom and I want you all to discuss, and let's actually come up with a more formulable answer.
Go ahead.
I just want to add on to that, like, I think we just need more, you know, painting the picture of what this looks like, right? Like, I'm considering, you know, doing an interview with green manufacturers. I know it's not the sexiest thing, but it's like, we got to see what that actually looks like. What does it look like to do that research? What does it look like to work on a solar array? What are the benefits? What is the work security? Why do you love your workplace? Why do you love this vision of the future and what it's bringing back to your community? We need more stories like that that humanize these things that feel very academic and almost elitist. At least that's how conservative media frames it. It's like we want to challenge those narratives. We have to also create that space for those voices to be heard. And again, that comes back to focusing on union workers, that focuses on these people that have been, you know, trying to transition away from extractive infrastructure. And I think there's such a huge storytelling opportunity in that, to where people could reach totally new audiences. And for me, I've made some videos on the just transition. I've interviewed folks who are trying to work in that space, who are struggling with that storytelling piece. But I think it's an exciting challenge for all of us to take on in this space, to bring in especially voices that we typically don't interact with. And I think that needs to happen ASAP.
I love that. Okay. So let's give a round of applause for storytelling. As a communicator, I can underline this, rather, as a behavioral scientist, I can say that everything that they're talking about in this panel is supported by advances in behavioral science. So y'all didn't need PhDs to reach the same final conclusion that I did, which is it's all about storytelling. It's about the right trusted communicator reaching the right audiences with the right messaging. So Dinara, how can we take advantage of this for the nuclear industry? How can we kind of take some of what we know is working, we see it in action here with Isaiah and Christy, and apply it to nuclear, which is, to be totally frank, has really struggled with the public perception challenge. There's a lot of pushback. It's really perceived as dangerous. It's perceived as conflated to nuclear proliferation. I will get that word out. And so how do we use storytelling and trusted spokespeople to move nuclear towards the clean energy future that it can be a part of?
That's a very good question, and I wanted to roll back about how to make a story more humanized, like not throw facts, which is, like, as an engineer, I understand it's easy, you have numbers, you want to show them to the world, like, hey, look, this is the
Right.
research I've done, and look how amazing it is. But then at the end of the day, when you speak to people who don't have a background, they just need to put things in perspective, right? How much, what is a dose? Like, compared to banana, how much of radiation I get from, like, living next to the power plant or from X-ray, like basic things that we face every day. This is what many nuclear advocates try to do right now, is to communicate it in a very humanistic way, in such a way that you understand that your daily life is as radioactive as it gets. Like, your partner is radioactive. You get dose from just laying next to another person. And those are things that we didn't communicate well. And I think we didn't study it in school, because in school, again, it's just pure science. There's pure numbers, and then try to figure what it has to do with anything I do and how I live. So yeah, putting things in perspective, question, what about the waste? Again, putting in perspective, compared to what? How dangerous it is compared to other types of waste, because toxic waste stays toxic forever. Nuclear waste decays. So how can we really compare it as apple to apple? Well, that's a big question, right? You need to understand that in certain time you will have zero radiation from the waste, but it takes time. But when we talk about the management of hazardous waste, toxic waste, well, the policy is regulations are less stringent, but because it's so I would say we get used to those types of waste, chemical waste and so on, it just doesn't freak us out anymore. Like eating fish and consuming mercury, it's just normal thing for us. We don't think about this, but thinking about the impact of those things and communicating that, this is what important for us as nuclear communicators, and how to put those things. And we'll learn a lot about that from you guys and from solar industries. They did a good PR job. And yes, this is where nuclear lagged on communication, and we trying to catch up, taking the lessons learned and taking feedback from the population about the questions they have, about the concerns they have. Like, the more we get information, what public thinks about nuclear, the easier for us is to find the ways to communicate that.
I love that. Thank you for acknowledging the fact that there is a long way to go for the nuclear sector, and there is a lot of lessons to be learned from other technologies that have made it to commercial viability, but that have still faced significant pushback. We're constantly getting stories from the fossil fuel industry that is keeping fossil fuel subsidies, top of wallet for many. And so that's really working out for that particular energy source, but there's a long way to go still for funding support for nuclear, funding support still for renewables, and the policies to support them as well. So I'm gonna throw this to each of you. I'll start with Isaias. What does the energy mix look like in the future? And what are the challenges to get us there? What is that? So we're talking about this just transition to clean energy. What is that energy mix that would be ideal, and how do we ensure that it is achieved justly? Small question.
A little big question. I'm just kidding. I think on that end, when I attended the Clean Energy Freedom Forum, I remember Ukrainian Prime Energy Minister was saying the three sources where they get their energy is geothermal, nuclear, and then solar and wind, and then I think there's like some natural gas there. I think it really depends on the country, right? I think at the end of the day, we cannot say that it should be followed the same way from different countries. And as much as Ukraine that's currently experiencing the war, it's like, they rely on nuclear energy. So on my end, it's like, who am I to say not to use nuclear energy to them after what's experiencing? But to me, I think it goes back to these ideas of like, how are we bringing younger and older people together to have these conversations? Because again, like you said, like the reason why I'm friends with my friends in their nuclear advocates is that I want to learn. Like, I really do want to learn. And I think that if we're able to kind of bridge these conversations together, despite being against certain things, them pro for certain things, that needs to happen. And yeah, I think governments should be able to work more locally than national scale, because I think an energy system should not be defined by the US government, by the state, or by that area. So then the people themselves have access to that and are able to protect those energy grid systems that are so vulnerable with extreme temperatures.
I mean, you are the next generation. It's so impressive that you are thinking through the transition to clean energy with obviously so many tenured experts are working across energy sectors and really thinking through how to create a clean energy future. What you're thinking about in disproportionately to them is it being a just transition. We know that younger generations really have that top of mind. So tell me your thoughts on that, Christy. That's why we assembled the younger generation to, not youth, but younger generations, to think through the future of this clean energy transition.
I mean, I think we can't talk about a just transition without talking about deep seabed mining. I just want to bring that up in this conversation because I don't think it's been addressed about the dependence on rare earth minerals for this quote-unquote just energy transition. A bunch of young people just recently were able to convince, folks in Canada to sign onto the moratorium against deep seabed mining. And I think it's exciting because young people are leading the charge to saying if we are going to build, these new energy infrastructures, it can't be the same business as usual approach. We have to think about even the resources and the labor that's going into building renewable energy. And we have to make sure that the communities that are also building those forms of energy are being respected, and that the resources being put into that are also being thought of to go towards a circular economy. And so I just wanted to bring that up just to say that young people understand circularity pretty well, at least in the circles that I'm in, understand that it doesn't make sense for us to then build an energy transition that then is going to lead to more waste, more harm, and more polarization. So I think young people understand that we need to meet in the middle and also to come up with not false solutions that actually have co-benefits. And I think that's completely possible. The solutions are already there. And I think it's important that we're thinking about economic development, thinking about supply chain management, and thinking about, what is this going to mean for the next generation with workforce development. So those are the three things that I'm thinking about moving forward, and I think young people also feel that way. We feel frustrated that the government's not moving fast enough, so we're relying maybe on some ways the private sector getting it right. But with that being said, that means we also have to hold them accountable to not do the same BS that the fossil fuel industry was doing too. They can't just slap a green label on it and say it's the end of the day. We're still going to have to hold them accountable as well in that. So, yeah.
Fair enough. So, do you agree with that, Dinara?
I very much agree, and I agree with Isaias with the point that there's no solution that fits every single country, especially, let's say, in my country, I'm from Kazakhstan. The weather is not going to allow us to put solar. It's too much snow, too much cold, and unfortunately, the climate conditions not going to go well with solutions that some countries can adopt. Same with wind. Some areas are not going to be suitable for wind turbines. And when we go to more densely populated areas, let's say Bangladesh, Nigeria, their choice is limited because it's either you develop your agriculture sector or develop solar projects. So you either have a food on the table for people or have a big giant farm that brings energy. So it shouldn't be this kind of choice. People have to have access to both. So because of that, it's really important to work with communities and their needs rather than provide solutions like, hey, it's going to work. We just want to fund it. It's nice technology. And unfortunately, no, it's not going to work like this. Even nuclear, not every country needs it. It depends on the needs. It depends on the demand and how country views their development in terms of manufacturing, whether they want to produce some other byproduct like synthetic fuel or hydrogen production, which we had a panel yesterday about impact on climate if it's not sourced properly, and how we can get climate negative if we source hydrogen in a bad way from fossil fuels, or even using other technologies without thinking about leaks and other impacts. So it's very systemic approach. We need to holistically understand where we make harm and where we can bring the benefits and balance those out, not to make the things worse. And as Christy said, the circularity in economy is really important, because if we mine all the time from scratch, well, what's gonna
what's gonna be left?
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna have no forests. We're gonna have devastated lands. And right now, I don't see enough communication and projects about the recycling of all the materials. There is some research here and there about lithium recycling, but what's tangible can be done, and not about, and when we don't speak only about the economics, but also about the social impact from not implementing those solutions as soon as possible and delaying that, oh, maybe tomorrow it will be feasible and economically viable. We cannot think like that for longer, because we're just making more harm, but by not implementing those solutions as soon as possible.
Sure. So we have to think through the pros and cons out of a lot of these different energy sources, and then we need to recognize that nuclear isn't necessarily appropriate for everywhere in the world, for every country. But back to you, Dinara, what role does it play? Where do you see nuclear in the future?
The role it plays, of course, is providing the stable baseload electricity source for countries, especially that don't have any electricity right now, and that will expect a higher demand. And then there are plans and startups that try to implement the baseload flexibility, when we can adapt solar, wind, and then when we have peak hours, we can produce something else, and we have too much demand, we can desalinate water. So with that in mind, there are so many solutions. Decarbonize the sector of cement production, steel production. So those are topics that have been in discussion when we talk about the advanced reactor technologies, right? We need high quality heat to decarbonize the heavy industry manufacturing and desalinate water in the areas where we have no support with water. We have shortage of water in some areas, in African especially countries. There's diesel generators that use to desalinate the water, because the solutions are not there and it's too expensive to provide the water this way. So those are areas where I can see nuclear playing very important role. And then, of course, the space exploration, medical usage, as you start exploring the field of medical treatment, cancer treatment. It is important to have at least a research reactor in your country, because shipping the medical isotopes is not viable, as they decay too fast. So with that in mind, research reactors will also play an important role in providing expertise, access to medical support, and other advancements. We still don't know many things about what we can do with atoms.
This is how you know Dinara has earned her degree in nuclear engineering from UC Berkeley. My goodness. And to be a communicator on top of that, that's rare that you find engineers being able to speak the science so matter-of-factly. So well done. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being a woman in this space, really, you know, taking the mantle forward for the field of nuclear and the role it's going to be playing in the clean energy transition and the clean energy future. What advice, this is my last question in the last minute and a half we have left, to Christy and to Isaiah, what advice do you have? You have such incredible platforms. You're such climate advocates. For those who are tuning in now, and they've seen the title of this panel, so they might just be tuning in for this, and they want to be engaged and involved, how can they use their platform, or how do you encourage them to develop a platform as well to promote working in and solutions to transitioning to clean energy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like we said, it's very complicated. If anyone got anything on this panel, it's not an easy black and white solution. It's very contextual, especially to your community, and especially when we're talking about things like community choice energy and, you know, breaking up the grid, things like that that require a lot of local politics and community engagement. It's really important that young people, and not just young people, all people, get involved and raise their voice on what do they think about these different solutions. If you disagree with it, raise your voice. If you agree with some aspects of it, raise your voice. I think it's important to build that collective consciousness of like what the vision of the future is, because sometimes we're always talking and focusing so much on the bad stuff, but we don't do as much storytelling on what is the good stuff, what are we actually building towards, and we need more imagination, we need more vision builders, we need more people putting their voice out there, and you don't have to be an expert, you just have to, be engaged, be curious, and engage your peers on it as well.
Love it. Love it. Isaiah.
Quickly, just listen to Black, Indigenous people of color. I think that the future of energy systems should be defined by those communities that are being built. And I think for so long, right, the energy sector has not been as diverse as we want it to be. So let's definitely get that diversity out there.
Amazing. Give it up for the next generation transitioning us to a clean energy future.